The kidnapping. The cold winds of Dracoa whipped through the towering cliffs of the northern basin. The sun barely peeked through the storm clouds that perpetually hovered above the war-torn planet. For years, Dracoa had been a pawn in a galactic struggle between powerful factions. Its once great cities now lay in ruin, the skies choked with smoke and fire. Among the destruction, one thing still remained: Princess Lasara. Eli Casson leaned back in his cockpit seat, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the control panel. He wasn't used to taking jobs like this. A simple rescue mission was more typical for someone with his mercenary background, but this was different. The Princess of Dracoa, the last of the royal bloodline, was held captive by the forces of Ravik Dra, leader of the rival faction who sought to control the planet's energy reserves. Eli's client had promised a handsome payout, but there was something about the mission that gnawed at him. Eli, Tessa's voice crackled over the comms. You're getting close to the compound. I've hacked into their surveillance systems. You should be able to infiltrate from the west entrance. Eli nodded, his hand instinctively reaching for the blaster at his side. His past as a mercenary might have been behind him, but his instincts hadn't dulled. He'd fought too many battles, killed too many men, to ever forget what was at stake. But this time, he wasn't just fighting for money. This place is crawling with their soldiers, Tessa continued. Be careful, Eli. You're not just dealing with thugs. Ravik's forces are well trained. Eli exhaled sharply, looking out at the distant compound, an enormous fortress built into the side of the mountains. Ravik's men had transformed the old palace into a prison, a place to break Lasara's spirit before they used her to seize the planet's power. But Eli wasn't going to let that happen. Not on his watch. He landed the ship a mile out, using the cover of the jagged terrain to hide his craft. As he moved through the rocky expanse, Tessa's voice guided him toward the west entrance. The old palace was surrounded by high walls, but a weak spot in the defenses had been identified. It was Eli's only chance to get inside undetected. The walls of the compound were massive, constructed from thick, obsidian-like rock. Eli moved quickly, his boots barely making a sound against the stone ground. The entrance was a heavy, metal door, locked tight. But Eli wasn't worried. His lockpicking skills were some of the best in the galaxy. With a soft click, the door swung open, revealing a narrow corridor lined with guards. Eli waited for the right moment. As two guards passed by, he silently took them out, slipping through the shadows like a ghost. He made his way deeper into the fortress, following Tessa's directions until he reached the central tower, the heart of the prison. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay. The sounds of distant voices echoed through the halls, but Eli pressed forward, undeterred. He could feel it, the presence of someone important. The moment he rounded the corner, he saw her. Princess Lasara sat alone in a small, dimly lit cell, her posture regal despite her imprisonment. Her long, silver hair cascaded around her shoulders, and her sharp, violet eyes focused on the entrance as Eli stepped forward. You came for me, she said, her voice quiet but filled with a strange, unshakable calm. Eli's heart skipped a beat. There was something different about her. Something that set her apart from the other prisoners he had rescued in the past. Let's get you out of here, Eli said, his voice rough but steady. But just as Eli moved to unlock her cell, the alarms blared throughout the compound. Ravik's men were closing in. Damn it, Eli cursed. We need to move now. As Lasara stood up, she hesitated for a moment before following Eli toward the exit. But something in her eyes had changed. She wasn't just the fragile princess Eli had expected to rescue. There was something more, something waiting to be unleashed. I'm ready, she said softly. Eli didn't have time to ask what she meant. Instead, he grabbed her arm, and the two of them ran for the exit. The battle was just beginning. But rescuing Lasara was only the start. And Eli knew, deep down, that this mission would change both of their lives forever. Unveiling power. The escape from the compound was far from smooth. The walls of Ravik-Dra's stronghold were equipped with advanced security measures, and the moment Eli and Princess Lasara stepped out of the prison tower, alarms blared, echoing through the facility. But it wasn't the guards that would make this mission difficult. It was Lasara herself. As they ran through the winding corridors, Lasara's footfalls quickened, but her face remained eerily calm, her eyes flickering with a strange intensity. Eli could feel it, the palpable energy that radiated from her, like a force he couldn't fully understand. It was as if the very planet had taken a liking to her, and in turn, she was beginning to resonate with it. "Eli, this way," Tessa's voice came through the comms, guiding them down a narrow passageway. It led to a large, circular chamber with high-tech doors that glowed faintly. He was familiar with these kinds of doors. They were used to hold high-security prisoners, and they could also lead to hidden escape routes. "Stay close," Eli said, his hand on Lasara's shoulder. But as soon as they stepped into the center of the room, Lasara faltered. A deep, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the air, as if the walls themselves were reacting to her presence. The ground beneath them shifted ever so slightly, and the room felt different. Lasara stopped walking, her eyes narrowing as she tilted her head. The hair on Eli's neck stood on end. She seemed to be listening to something. Her hands rose instinctively, palms open as if reaching for something. "Lasara, what are you?" Suddenly, a blast of energy surged from her hands, slamming into the wall ahead of them with a deafening crash. The walls cracked and trembled, and the light from the room flickered wildly. Eli staggered back, barely keeping his balance as the shockwave reverberated through his body. "Lasara!" Eli shouted. He rushed to her side, grabbing her arm. What the hell was that? She stared at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly as if she were equally surprised. Her breathing was shallow, but there was a look of awe in her eyes. I didn't mean to." Eli's heart raced as he looked back at the massive gash in the wall. The once sturdy structure was now split, the jagged edges glowing faintly with some unknown energy. It was clear that something within her had just awoken, something powerful. "We need to leave. Now." Eli's voice was sharp, commanding. The sound of Ravik's soldiers approaching echoed through the walls. They were coming faster than he anticipated. Tessa's voice returned, but this time with more urgency. "Eli, I've got the escape route ready, but you need to move fast. It's not just Ravik's soldiers coming, there's something else, something worse." "I know," Eli muttered under his breath. His gaze shifted to Lasara, who was still gazing at her hands, as if trying to comprehend the power she just unleashed. He didn't have time to explain anything to her. He didn't even have time to process it himself. But one thing was clear, the princess was no ordinary royal. And whatever power had just manifested in her, it was only the beginning. As they hurried through the underground tunnels, Lasara's steps grew more deliberate, and the flicker of that strange power she possessed didn't fade. Eli was aware of it now, aware that he was not just protecting a helpless princess. He was escorting a force of nature. They reached the outside entrance of the compound, hidden behind a cluster of trees and large boulders, where Tessa was waiting with their getaway ship. But before they could board, something unexpected happened. A crackling noise filled the air, followed by the sudden appearance of a strange figure, a tall, cloaked alien with shimmering metallic skin. His eyes glowed with an eerie light, and his presence sent chills down Eli's spine. "Zirith," Lasara whispered, her voice barely audible, but filled with recognition. The figure stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Lasara. He was alien, yes, but there was something about him that felt ancient. "Princess Lasara," he spoke with a voice that seemed to reverberate with an otherworldly power. "It's time you embraced your true nature." Eli's hand instinctively went to his weapon, but Zirith raised a hand, stopping him without so much as a glance. The strange aura surrounding him made it impossible to move, as if the air itself had frozen. "Who are you?" Eli demanded, his voice laced with authority. "What do you want with her?" "I am Zirith," the figure replied. A guardian, protector, and guide. I've come to help Lasara understand the power within her. He turned to Lasara. You have already begun to awaken, princess. But there is much more you must learn. You are not simply the last royal heir of Dracoa. You are the embodiment of Dracoa itself. Your power is tied to the energy of the planet. Lasara's eyes widened at his words, but she didn't back away. There was no fear in her gaze, only a quiet understanding. Eli took a step forward. And what exactly does that mean? He wasn't sure if he was ready for the answer. It means, Zirith said, that Lasara's powers go beyond anything you've seen. She can channel Dracoa's energy, the very life force of the planet. It's this energy that sustains the world, and it's this energy that Ravik seeks to control. But she, Lasara, has the ability to bend it to her will. Eli's mouth went dry. He hadn't expected any of this. He'd been hired to rescue a princess, not to escort a planetary force of nature. You must learn to control this power, Lasara, Zirith continued, before it consumes you. And before Ravik can use it to destroy everything. The urgency in his voice struck a chord with Eli. He glanced back at Lasara, who now appeared to be processing the gravity of the situation. Her expression was no longer one of confusion, but one of determination. I'll help you control it, Eli said, his voice firm. He wasn't sure how, but he was ready to fight for her, for the planet, and for whatever strange future lay ahead. The escape ship was finally ready, and they boarded quickly. As the ship ascended from the surface of Dracoa, Eli couldn't help but look back at the planet below. The winds howled through the skies, and the land seemed to pulse with life, as if the planet itself was awakening. And with that awakening, the battle for Dracoa's future had only just begun. The enemy strikes back. The cold emptiness of space surrounded their small escape craft as it shot through the starlit void. Eli sat in the pilot's seat, his eyes focused on the glowing coordinates on the display in front of him. He hadn't said much since they left Dracoa's surface, his mind racing with everything he had just learned. Zirith had warned them, Ravik Dra was already preparing for his next move, and now that he knew the true power of Lasara, nothing would stop him from trying to seize control of Dracoa. Behind him, Lasara sat quietly, staring at the dark expanse of space through the small viewport. Her features were still tense, but there was an underlying calm in her demeanor. Her mind was working through everything Zirith had said. The idea that her very existence was tied to the planet, that her powers could shape the future of Dracoa, was a lot to take in. Tessa, sitting beside Lasara, turned to Eli. We've got a problem. There's no way we're making it to the rebel stronghold without Ravik's forces catching up to us. We need a new plan. Eli didn't reply immediately. His thoughts were elsewhere. The princess, Lasara, wasn't just a political figure or a ruler in exile. She was a weapon. And Eli wasn't sure how to feel about that. Was he here to protect her? Or was he here to ensure that the galaxy didn't collapse under the weight of the power she wielded? Tessa, Eli finally spoke, his voice low and steady. What's our best option right now? Tessa tapped at the holographic display in front of her. Well, we could try to get to the rebel base on the far side of Dracoa's moon, but that's risky. Ravik's ships are already in the area. If we're spotted. There's another way, Lasara spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. Both Eli and Tessa turned to look at her. What do you mean? Eli asked, frowning. Lasara's violet eyes glowed faintly as she stared out into space. I can feel it. The planet's energy, its life force, it's calling to me. We don't need to hide. We can use the planet's core energy to shield us. But I'll need to tap into that energy, fully. Eli felt a chill run down his spine. The implications of what Lasara was saying were both terrifying and fascinating. She was suggesting something that sounded almost mythical. But if she was serious, it could mean the difference between life and death for all of them. How do you plan to do that? Eli asked, his voice skeptical but intrigued. I'm not sure, Lasara admitted, her voice soft. But I can feel it inside me. The core of Dracoa's power, it's connected to me. I just need to focus, and trust that I can unlock it. Tessa shot Eli a concerned look. That sounds dangerous. If she doesn't know how to control that power, we're all dead. I'm willing to try, Lasara said firmly, her eyes meeting Eli's. I have to. Ravik won't stop until he has control of Dracoa, and that means he won't stop until I'm either under his control or dead. Eli considered her words. He didn't trust this power. It was too raw, too unknown. But he wasn't about to let Ravik win either. All right, he said, his voice resolute. We'll make the jump to the moon's surface. You can try to tap into this power, but we're not staying in orbit long. We're going to need a plan B. Lasara nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant planet. I understand. The next few hours passed in silence as the small craft hurtled toward the surface of Dracoa's moon. Eli kept his eyes on the ship's instruments, constantly checking for signs of incoming enemy ships. The calm in Lasara's demeanor worried him. There was no doubt she was capable of extraordinary things. He had seen that firsthand when she had unleashed her power in the underground chamber. But this was different. She was about to attempt something far more dangerous than anything she had done before. As they approached the moon's surface, Eli landed the ship in a secluded valley surrounded by jagged cliffs. The area was barren, with only a few sparse trees and rocks scattered across the landscape. It was remote, far enough from the cities of Dracoa to avoid detection for now. I'll start preparing the shields, Tessa said, already getting to work on her console. If Ravik finds us, we'll need every ounce of defense we've got. Eli turned to Lasara, who had remained seated in the back, her eyes closed, her hands resting gently in her lap. She seemed to be concentrating, as if reaching out to something just beyond her grasp. Eli approached her cautiously, unsure of how to help or whether his presence would disturb her focus. You ready for this? He asked quietly. Lasara opened her eyes slowly, locking gazes with him. There was a quiet strength in her eyes that had not been there before. She nodded. I have to be. Without another word, she stood up and moved toward the center of the small ship, where a holographic display projected the surface of Dracoa below them. The planet seemed alive, pulsing with energy. Eli could feel it, too, the hum of something vast and powerful just beneath the surface. Take deep breaths, Lasara, Tessa called from the controls. We're running out of time. Lasara closed her eyes again, her hands lifting. The air around them began to tremble, faint at first but growing stronger. A low hum reverberated through the walls of the ship, and Eli could see the soft glow of energy gathering around Lasara's form. Eli watched in awe as the light around her intensified, her hands now glowing with the same violet energy that had surged from her before. It was more controlled now, but still raw, still untamed. She was reaching out, he could see it, feel it, tapping into something ancient. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, the energy from Dracoa's surface seemed to respond. The planet's power surged upward, a vast wave of energy rising from the core. The ship's sensors began to malfunction as the ship's shield strained to keep up with the intensity of the energy. Lasara! Eli shouted, seeing the strain on her face. You're going too far. But Lasara didn't seem to hear him. Her body was now surrounded by a crackling aura of energy, her eyes glowing brightly. She was pulling everything she could from Dracoa itself, its heart, its life force. She was becoming a conduit for the planet's power. Suddenly, there was a deafening roar outside the ship. The ground trembled beneath them. The ship's shields flared as Ravik's forces arrived, their fleet descending from the sky. Eli's heart skipped a beat. They were running out of time. But Lasara wasn't finished yet. She opened her eyes, and in that moment, Eli saw the truth of what she had become. She wasn't just the princess of Dracoa anymore. She was Dracoa itself, unstoppable, fierce, and ready to fight. "Prepare for battle," she said softly, her voice steady. "They'll learn that this planet doesn't fall easily." And with that, she unleashed the full force of her power. The battle for Dracoa's future. The battlefield was a storm of chaos. The once serene surface of Dracoa's moon was now lit up with blinding flashes of energy and the roar of weapons fire. Eli's hands gripped the controls of the ship as the tremors beneath them rattled the hull, the shaking making it harder to maintain control. Outside, the sky was filled with Ravik's ships, their sleek, menacing forms descending with terrifying precision. But even as the odds seemed overwhelming, there was one thing they hadn't counted on. Lysara. Eli looked over at her as she stood at the center of the ship's cabin, her hands raised high. Her body crackled with violet energy, each pulse of power rippling outward in waves, as though the very atmosphere around her had begun to bend to her will. She was no longer just a princess in hiding, she was the embodiment of Dracoa itself, wielding its power as if it were an extension of her own being. The air hummed with a strange vibration that seemed to emanate from her, mixing with the sounds of the surrounding battle. The small ship was currently hovering above the valley, its systems running on overdrive as the powers shielding desperately fought to protect them. Below, Ravik soldiers, dressed in battle armor, were spreading out across the rocky landscape, seeking to flush them out. And beyond them, the larger warships were slowly descending, preparing to launch their assault. Tessa worked furiously at the ship's console, her fingers moving rapidly over the holographic interface. "They've deployed ground troops," she said, her voice tense. "We need to move or we'll be trapped here." Eli glanced back toward Lysara. "Are you sure you can hold them off?" He hated asking, but he needed to know. If she wasn't ready, they would have to retreat, no choice. The stakes were too high. Lysara didn't answer right away. Her eyes were closed as she focused, her breathing slow and deep, each exhale seemingly drawing in more of the planet's energy. Finally, her eyes opened, glowing brightly with violet light. The power emanating from her flared, and the ground below seemed to respond, shaking violently beneath them. "I can feel it," Lysara said, her voice calm but filled with an intensity Eli had never heard from her before. "The planet is with me. It's stronger than I ever imagined. I'll protect us." Before Eli could say another word, she extended her arms, palms outstretched toward the approaching enemy. The ground rumbled violently. The ships above seemed to falter, and the sky itself flickered, the atmosphere shimmering as though the fabric of reality itself was warping. Then, with a sudden, deafening roar, a massive shockwave of energy erupted from Lysara. The entire landscape seemed to fold in on itself, the rocks below lifting into the air as if caught in a storm. Eli had to shield his eyes as the blinding light filled the sky, but when the light faded, the devastation was clear. The ground was torn apart, as though a great force had struck it. The enemy soldiers were thrown back, tumbling through the air as the shockwave tore through them. Their armor couldn't withstand the energy Lysara had unleashed. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The landscape itself had changed. The valley, once barren, was now a battlefield scarred by deep cracks that radiated outward, fissures opening in the earth as if the planet itself was fighting back. Eli stared at Lysara, unable to speak. Her power was unimaginable. She was the planet, and the planet was her. "Is this enough?" Lysara asked, her voice calm, almost serene despite the destruction she had just wrought. Eli swallowed hard. "For now. But we need to stay mobile. Ravik won't be distracted for long." Lysara nodded, her expression unwavering. "Then let's finish this." The battle wasn't over, though. Ravik's forces quickly regrouped. While his ground troops were disoriented, the warships above were not. They began to launch precision strikes on the terrain around them, trying to pinpoint where they were hiding. The warships' weapons fired in calculated bursts, tearing into the moon's surface with ease. Tessa cursed under her breath. "They've locked onto our position. We're running out of options here." Eli turned to Lysara. Can you protect us from those ships? Lysara's expression was unreadable, but her eyes shimmered with violet intensity. I can try. But I need to focus. I won't be able to stop them all at once. Eli clenched his jaw. We can't let them break through. You have to stop them. Without another word, Lysara closed her eyes, raising her arms once again. The ship trembled as the energy around her built up, surrounding her in a swirling cocoon of raw, crackling power. It was almost as if she were summoning the planet itself, pulling every ounce of energy she could find. Eli gripped the console tightly as the ship began to shake, the air thick with electricity. And then it happened. A massive surge of energy erupted from Lysara. The air itself seemed to twist and bend. Eli heard a deafening sound as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. Bolts of energy shot from her palms, streaking through the sky like comet tails, striking Ravik's warships with pinpoint accuracy. The first ship was hit with such force that it disintegrated instantly. Explosions erupted, lighting up the sky in a fiery display. The second ship was struck shortly after, and the third didn't last much longer. Each ship that was struck by Lysara's energy disintegrated in a brilliant flash of light, their hulking forms reduced to nothing but debris. As the last ship fell, Eli exhaled in disbelief. You did it. Lysara's expression was unreadable, but there was no satisfaction in her face. She wasn't reveling in the destruction. She was focused, as though she had just completed an important task, one that was far from over. But the battle was far from finished. Eli's communicator buzzed with an incoming message. Eli, do you copy? This is Tessa. There's one more thing you need to know. Her voice was strained. Ravik's final weapon is on its way. It's coming for us. Eli turned to Lysara, his heart pounding. What weapon? Lysara looked at him with a quiet understanding. We'll face it together. Whatever it is, we'll stop it. The ground trembled again, and far in the distance, a new threat emerged, a massive, dreadnought-like ship with black, jagged edges, surrounded by dozens of smaller ships. It was larger than any ship Eli had ever seen, its size alone enough to crush everything in its path. Looks like the real battle is just beginning, Eli muttered. But with you, Lysara, we might actually stand a chance. The final stand. The massive dreadnought ship loomed in the distance, its dark, jagged silhouette casting a long shadow over the broken landscape of Dracoa's moon. The smaller ships surrounding it seemed insignificant in comparison to its overwhelming size, but the sheer power it radiated was enough to chill Eli to the core. His eyes flicked from the view screen to Lysara, who was standing silently beside him, her gaze fixed on the approaching enemy fleet. Tessa's voice crackled through the comms again, that thing is going to crush us if we don't do something fast. Its weapons are unlike anything we've seen before. We need a strategy, Eli. Now. Eli swallowed, his mind racing. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had one advantage, Lysara. The power she wielded was extraordinary, but could it be enough to stop a ship like that? Her energy had decimated Ravik's other forces, but this ship was something entirely different. Something darker. I won't let them take Dracoa, Lysara said, her voice calm but filled with an unyielding strength. She was standing in the center of the cabin, her hands raised as if drawing the very energy of the planet to her. This is my fight now. I will stop them. Eli turned to face her, concern etched across his face. Lysara, this is unlike anything we've faced. I don't want you pushing yourself too far. But Lysara only shook her head, her eyes glowing with intensity. You've seen what I can do. I've felt the power of the planet within me. It's not just mine, it belongs to all of Dracoa. And I will use it to protect us. Tessa added, her voice tense, we don't have the luxury of time. That dreadnought is closing in fast. We need to act now. Eli nodded grimly. There was no more room for hesitation. If Lysara was to wield the full power of Dracoa, they would need to push beyond the limits they had imagined. He didn't know if it would work, but they had no other choice. "All right," Eli said, taking a deep breath. "We're going in. Lasara, if you can, draw the ship's fire. Tessa, we'll need you to handle evasions and keep the ship intact while she does her thing. I'll handle the weapons." Tessa gave a sharp nod and immediately got to work, her fingers flying over the console as she prepared the ship for the impending assault. Eli could see the sweat on her brow, but there was determination in her eyes. They were all in this together, and they would fight until the end. Lasara took a deep breath, her eyes closing as she centered herself. The air around her began to shimmer with violet energy again. The power she was drawing from Dracoa was incredible, he could feel it in the atmosphere, the very ground trembling beneath them as if the planet itself were waking up in response to her call. It was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Eli guided the ship toward the dreadnought, weaving between the debris from the previous battle. The dark warship's weapons began to charge, massive energy beams gathering at its core. "Brace for impact," Eli shouted, knowing that every second counted. As the first wave of energy beams shot toward them, Lasara's power surged. She extended her hands outward, and the ship around them seemed to hum with energy as her violet aura intensified. The incoming fire slowed, the beams curving away from the ship as if they were being redirected by an unseen force. The blasts exploded against the moon's surface instead, creating massive craters where they hit. But Lasara wasn't finished. The ground below began to ripple as she harnessed the energy of Dracoa itself. A shockwave of power erupted from her, and the ship's shields flickered under the strain of the enormous force she was unleashing. From the center of the valley, massive tendrils of violet light shot toward the dreadnought, wrapping around the enormous ship like chains, pulling it down toward the surface. "Hold steady," Eli shouted, steering the ship into a tight spiral to avoid more incoming fire. Tessa's voice was steady as she worked to keep the shields intact, but even she couldn't hide the strain in her tone. "This is insane. She's going to collapse the entire moon." "Do it," Eli gritted his teeth, focusing on evading the enemy fire. "If that's what it takes, we'll deal with the consequences later." With a final, earth-shaking cry, Lasara released the full force of Dracoa's energy. The dreadnought's hull creaked and groaned under the weight of the power binding it to the surface. Then, with a violent crack, the ship's shields collapsed under the pressure. The massive warship was no longer able to resist the force of Dracoa's life force. The dreadnought's weapons sputtered and fizzled, then fell silent. The ship trembled as if it were on the brink of collapse. From the control room, Eli could see the massive vessel slowly descending, its once mighty presence now nothing more than a crumpled husk. Lasara collapsed to her knees, her violet aura flickering before dimming entirely. Her energy had been spent. "Lasara!" Eli shouted, his heart pounding in his chest. He immediately steered the ship closer to her position, barely managing to land it safely before rushing to her side. She looked up at him, her eyes weak but filled with determination. "It's done," she whispered, her voice strained. "Ravik's fleet is defeated. But at what cost?" Eli asked softly, kneeling beside her. He could see how exhausted she was, her face pale and her breath shallow. The power she had just unleashed was nothing short of extraordinary, but it had clearly drained her. "I gave everything to protect Dracoa," Lasara said, her voice barely a whisper. "But we've won. And with that victory, the future of Dracoa is in our hands." Eli looked at her, his heart swelling with admiration. She had sacrificed so much, and yet there was no trace of regret in her eyes. In that moment, he realized how far they had come. They weren't just survivors of a war. They were a family now, bound together by a shared purpose. And for the first time since this battle had begun, Eli allowed himself to believe that they had a chance to rebuild. The war might not be over, but they had just taken the first step towards something far greater. Dracoa would rise again. Eli reached out, gently taking Lasara's hand in his. "We'll rebuild it together. This is just the beginning. As the sound of the final enemy ships fleeing echoed in the distance, the future of Dracoa seemed a little brighter.